So what we're going to do now is what I call the animal metaphor exercise. This is actually excerpted from my book, Rapid Recovery, Accelerated Information Processing and Healing. The purpose of this exercise is to gain an understanding of the dynamics of continually attracting certain people or patterns into one's own life. So I'm going to ask you to relax as much as is possible under the circumstances, close your eyes, and go inside and ask for an image of an animal that to you represents your maleness. If you are male, that's your masculinity. Or your femaleness or femininity if you are female. Then once you have that image in mind, put that image aside. And then again, go inside and ask for an image of an animal that to you represents your opposite gender. When you have let such an image appear in your mind's eye, I would ask you to now stay focused inside and observe those two animals in some form of interaction for a couple of minutes. So again, you go inside, you request an image of an animal that represents your specific gender, and just note what that is. Once you have an image of that animal, just put it aside and go inside once again and ask for an image of an animal that represents the opposite gender. Once you've had an image of both of those animals, I'm asking that you take now a couple of minutes, just to observe those two animals in some form of interaction. And once you have observed for a couple of minutes, just take the next 20 or 30 seconds or so to allow the scene to come to some sense of closure, whatever that might mean for you, of course. Following the completion of the scene observed, I would ask you to ask yourself the following questions to ascertain its particular personal context. It is also a very good idea to make sure that you make notes of your responses to the following questions. What animal represented the male or female? Always first find out the animal that represents your own gender. And then what animal represented the male, female being the opposite gender. So the next question becomes, what do you consider to be the characteristics of whatever the animal was that represented your gender? What do you consider to be the characteristics of whatever the animal was that represented the opposite gender? Then note what happened in the scene. And also note what happened to bring it to some sense of completion. Note also, how did it leave you feeling? Now, having noted your responses to these questions, it is a good idea to go over them and see if the exercise held any confusion for you, if it explains anything or actually confuses you. Do you have an understanding as to why these particular animals would show? Could you relate to the characteristics? Who do you believe was the first whatever animal in your life, meaning the animal in your imagery that represented the opposite gender? Did the manner in which the scene closed, or whatever happened in the scene, have any correlation to what is or has happened in your own life? Did you notice any patterns? For instance, any metaphors or themes that have played out in your own life? Are there any gender relationship patterns? You may notice, for instance, that it actually reminds you of your own relationship, or even that of your parents' relationship with each other or with yourself. Following some of of your own analysis of what you saw, and if you felt there was any bearing or relevance to yourself in the exercise, then it's a good idea to ask yourself the questions: were you the animal you would actually choose to be? If you could be any animal within the animal kingdom, which would it be and why? You can see whether or not, in fact, you are then living according to the path of your true beliefs, or if you are actually living like processionary caterpillars. I'll explain that in a moment. But they just go continually around in circles without stopping to, in fact, check to see whether they're going in a direction that is actually right or healthy for them. Now, this exercise was of particular help to a number of people, but I remember specifically a woman who had married like 4 or 5 alcoholics, and she was still wondering if there was some sort of pattern. It showed her that the pattern was just a continuation of taking care of men in the same fashion that she had her own father. She had never told herself that she had done a first-class job for a long deceased father, and no longer needed actually to fill that void with another caregiver position. This exercise can often assist someone in making choices to change in a manner that is relatively safe and does not necessarily involve any abreactive reaction on their part. Just some rational decision making that hopefully can have a profound effect in terms of breaking the negative patterns that have existed in that person's life. Now, I do not know the origin of this description of processionary caterpillars, but I like the analogy that it provides. So I'm just going to, as I mentioned this a little earlier, I'm now going to just read this to you. So processionary caterpillars feed upon pine needles. They move through the trees in a long procession, one leading and the others following, each with his eyes half closed and his head snugly fitted against the rear extremity of his predecessor. A French naturalist, after patiently experimenting with a group of the caterpillars, finally enticed them to the rim of a large flower pot. He succeeded in getting the first one connected up to the last one, thus forming a complete circle, which started moving around in a procession with neither beginning nor end. The naturalist expected that after a while they would catch on to the joke, get tired of their useless march, and start off in some new direction. But not so. Through sheer force of habit, the living, creeping circle kept moving around the rim of the pot, around and around, keeping the same relentless pace for 7 days and 7 nights, and would doubtless have continued longer had it not been for sheer exhaustion and ultimate starvation. Incidentally, an ample supply of food was close at hand and plainly visible, but it was outside the range of the circle, so they continued along the beaten path. They were following instinct, habit, custom, tradition, precedent, past experience, standard practice, or whatever you may choose to call it. But they were following it blindly. They meant well, but got no place. I hope this helps you understand a little bit about maybe yourself, maybe your own habits and patterns, and that they can be broken. Thank you.